מזמור לדוד, אדוני אלוהי לא יחסר, בינתו שירביצני, על מי מנוחות ינהלני, נפשי ישובב, ינחני במעגלי צדק, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צר מוות, לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך, המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן, נגד צורריי, דשנת בשם מראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
As Cantor Shipman recited Psalm 23 in the Hebrew, we'll now recite it in the English. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We gather this morning to bring much praise and love to the life and memories of our beloved Sara Drew, a loving daughter, a loving wife, a loving mother, grandmother, and friend. She was a survivor. In our tradition, every Friday night at the Shabbos table, husband and children and grandchildren recite a section from the Bible praising their bubby, praising their mother, praising their wife. It's called Eshet Chayil, and it's very fitting to read that for Sarah today. Eshet Chayil miyimsa v'rachot mipnei machra batakba lebala v'shal lo yechsar. What a precious find is a woman of valor. Her worth is far beyond rubies. Her husband puts his confidence in her and lacks no thing. She is good to him, never bad all the days of her life. She opens her hand to the needy, extends her hand to the poor. She's clothed with strength and splendor. She looks to the future cheerfully. She opens her mouth with wisdom. Her tongue is guided by kindness. She oversees the activities of her household and never eats the bread of idleness. Her children come forward and bless her. Her husband praises her, saying, "Many women have done superbly, but you surpass them all." Charm is deceitful, beauty vain, but a God-fearing woman is much to be praised. Extol her for the fruit of her hand, and whenever people gather, her deeds will always speak her praise. Every year we read the Torah, and we rejoice at its end, even though the final section tells us about the death of our beloved Moses. Upon its completion, we return to the beginning and start to read the Torah once again from its beginning. Judaism teaches that our lives are like a book. Our actions and words are recorded and remembered. This past week, Sarah left this world after 88 years, a difficult life, surviving the Shoah, surviving life in Siberian labor camps, but yet she accomplished so much and raised this loving family. The rabbis imagine Moses crying while writing the final chapters of the Torah telling of his death, and so it is for us today. Though Sarah's book is sealed with our tears, we must rejoice, for we now have the opportunity to share from the beginning. She's departed from the world with a good name. She's left behind many in mourning, her 2 sons and daughter-in-law, Joe and Barbara and Floyd, the apples of her eye, her grandchildren, Emily and David, Lindy, Benjamin and Adrian, and Nick and Jennifer, and the diamonds in her crown, her great-grandchildren, Gavin, Cohen, Laney, Campbell, and Annabeth. Sarah now joins her beloved parents, Avram and Fega, and her husband of 62 years, Max. She joins them all in their eternal home in heaven. At this point, her two sons are going to share special words of tribute to their mother, and first I'll call upon Floyd.
Good morning, everyone. Let me begin by first thanking all of you for attending this service today. On behalf of my family and myself, your presence is muchly appreciated, and we're glad that you took time out of your day to pay tribute to my mom. I have been able to think about this day for the past 6 months or so, as I saw my mother's physical condition and her mental condition start to deteriorate slowly. It's a bittersweet day for us. It's bitter, obviously, because she's no longer with us here physically, but she will remain in our hearts and in our minds and thoughts for all the days of my life, I'm sure. To pass away is a natural occurrence in life, but to have to pass away was as a result of such an insidious disease such as dementia or Alzheimer's, and to watch somebody who you love so dearly deteriorate is a very difficult thing to absorb and to accept. The people that pass on don't generally pass on from the Alzheimer's or dementia disease, but because of physical impairments that begin to develop in life. And to have yourself robbed of your dignity during this process and of your mental acumen, if you will, in order to be able to deal properly with these diseases that are starting to ravage your body at the same time, it's a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways, and it's very, very cruel. As I told the rabbi yesterday, this woman did not deserve this fate in life, to end her life in this fashion. I don't quite exactly understand why it is in our society that we don't allow people who are confronted with this type of ailment to gracefully or graciously decide to move on with their lives and bring it to an end on their own. But for my part today, I am very pleased that we are here and this is over. Not so much for me, my brother, or our respective families, okay, but for my mom. People should not have to suffer this way as they leave the world after having done so many good things in life and having been exposed to so many difficult moments over the course of her lifetime as well. So in that respect, that's the bitter side of it that I bring to you today. My remarks are going to be very short here. I really don't have that much that I want to say, even though I've thought about this for quite a long time already, about this particular day. My brother's going to provide you with an anthology, I guess, of her life, or chronology maybe is a better choice of words, about her life from when she was born over in Europe and all she endured, and prior to her coming to America, and then our family's life in America. So for my part, I would like to first say how fortunate I was to have such a quality person as a mother. She had one agenda in her life, and it was very simple. She just wanted to make sure that she could care for her family. She was not a very educated person in the source of, or from the perspective of having received formal education in life through various institutions. But she was honestly wise beyond her years. She would share life experiences with me on a regular basis that she encountered and tried to explain to me how these things adapt to the world that we live in today. And oftentimes the circumstances were very similar. Things have a way of repeating themselves. And some people are very fortunate that they're able to have a formal education, whereas others who are not, they learn from different devices. And in that respect, she had much to offer to many, but she was an incredible counselor to me over the course of my lifetime. Today, I think the most satisfying thing I can say today about this entire experience is that we were able to provide my mother with an incredible quality of life over the course of her past 4 or 5 years that she was with us. I am so thankful for that, because I know for a fact that there are so many elderly people that pass on. They don't have the wherewithal or the benefit of a support group, okay, to attend to their needs. That is not the case with my mom. We did everything humanly possible to provide her with the support, the guidance, the medical care, and the love necessary, so that she always understood that in her final days that she was with us, that she was never alone. As some of you know, I live back in Las Vegas. I'm not from the Cleveland area, but I flew back here about 2 weeks ago to visit my mother, to basically say my goodbyes to her while she was still with us. I walked into this assisted living center where she was at, and she was sitting in a wheelchair with a group of other residents at that facility. They were sitting around watching a movie at the time, and she was taking a short nap. I walked up to her, and I tapped her on the shoulder to wake her up. And she looked up at me, and though she had already lost her ability to speak, her vocabulary had been taken from her as a result of this disease. It didn't prevent her from smiling at me, reaching out for my hand, and kissing me on the hand. It was very difficult. So, again, I'm thankful for the fact that we were able to provide for her needs in a fashion that I think she very much deserved. Secondly, I'm very thankful that my children and my brother's children had the opportunity to get acquainted with their grandparents. My parents both were survivors of the Holocaust, and 3 of my 4 grandparents, 3 of the 4 of my grandparents, okay, didn't make it through the Shoah. I had the opportunity to meet my grandfather that did survive, which was my mom on my mom's side, on 2 occasions as he went to Israel to reside after they left the problems that they encountered during the Holocaust in Europe. My children, they received that gift of being able to know all their grandparents. And that's very special. And I think what's most special about it is we should appreciate the very high price that those that went before us paid during the Holocaust in order to carve out a new lifestyle here in America for her survivors. I know things in America aren't perfect. There's many shortcomings in our society. There's still, anti-Semitism is still an issue. But the way it's practiced here in America is a very far cry from the stories that I heard about from both of my parents that they encountered during the course of their lifetime as young adults growing up in Europe. So that's something you guys should remember to pass on to your children. It's an important message. Both of my parents, they were not particularly religious people, but they were very much Zionists. There's no question about that. And that message should be passed on to your children as you guys go forward. And finally, I'd like to thank my brother publicly. He went out of his way to attend to my mom's needs on a daily basis. And I don't think it's possible, it's not even conceivable that you could have found anybody, okay, who would have been more attentive to her needs than Joe was. As I said, I live some 2,000 miles away from here. But after my father died, Joe and I sat down with Mom. Seems like it was only yesterday, to be honest with you, and it was already 10 years ago. Excuse me. But we decided right then and there the roles that we should all assume in order to assist Mom to go forward in this world. And we worked out an agreement between the three of us that attended to all of her needs, whether they be emotional, medical, financial, whatever. And I guess the partnership that we formed, okay, allowed us to attend to all of her needs on a daily basis. And for that, I too am very thankful. So in closing, before I turn this over to my brother, okay, my mom had a very difficult life as a child, but I do hope that she understood, I think she did, okay, that she had a tremendous quality of life, and she was surrounded by people who loved her till the very last day on this good earth. I thank you very much, and now allow me to turn this over to my brother, who will share the story of my mom and the life that she did leave. Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to also thank everyone for coming, friends and family, the people that took care of my mother. People come from a long distance, from Detroit, California, Nevada. All of us, I think, become who we are as a result of our critical experiences in life, those critical moments in our life. And as a result of these critical events in our youth and our social relationships develop, we learn things. And we make a choice in life. And the choice is ours to make. And what choice is that? Who will we become? Who do we wish to be? My mom was no different. What were her critical experiences in life? Those that determined who she was and what choices she could make. I'd like to go over a short chronology of them because they're defining moments of who she was, and I think to some extent who we are, we being my brother and I and our kids. In 1939, my mother was living in Poland, and the Russians came in from the east to the west, and the German Nazis came in from the west to the east and divided Poland. Those people who were Polish and who didn't conform to what the Nazis wanted were taken to concentration camps. The Jews in Poland and there were on their way to the concentration camps also. On the Russian side, where my mother was, those were taken by the Russians, by the communists, and they were asked, do they wish to be repatriated after the war, or do they want to become Russian citizens? My grandfather, my mother, and her mother said they'd like to be repatriated back to their home. Who doesn't want to go home? That was the honest thing to say, but it was the wrong thing to say. Because those people did not want to be repatriated. They did not want to become Russian citizens. They were taken on trains, herded into trains, and driven for about a week and a half to Siberia, where they were placed in labor camps, forced labor camps. My mother at this time was 11 years old. In those labor camps, there was a lot of work. There was no food, or very little food. Forgive me for a minute. There was no escape from these prison camps. There were thousands and thousands of miles of forest. There was nowhere to go. It was there that my grandmother, my mother's mother, became quite ill and couldn't carry on. And my mother went to the Nacharnik, that's Russian for the supervisor of the labor camp, and said, please, my mother's very, very sick. Could you please help us? And Nacharnik said, I won't say it in Russian, but he said, your mother will die here. And my mother started crying, the little girl started crying, says, please, please help me. And the Charnik said, you can have a pass if you can find food somewhere, go find it, but we don't have any for you. So my mother went home, told her father. They'd heard that there were a lot of Ukrainians, kulaks, that had been transported to Siberia by Stalin because they didn't want to accept collectivization. Kulaks are poor farmers, peasant farmers, and they were there. And so my mother walked through the forest for miles at night, did not know where she was going really, because they weren't permitted to go there, but she had a pass now to go. And she came upon this house, and a Ukrainian woman came out, and my mother, they took her in, such a girl. My mother told me a story. And my mother told me that they gave her a potato and a little bit of milk and some sugar, and some butter. And they wrapped it up in a handkerchief that the babushka wears, you know. And she put that in a basket, and she carried it home, and she gave it to her mother. She had been giving her mother her food, and my grandfather had been giving his wife his food, but it wasn't enough. Anyway, for whatever reason, they transported the Jews who were in that part of that camp to another camp. And that other camp is where my grandmother basically swole up and died from starvation. So they were in this area, and they had to bury my grandmother. But they didn't have a shovel, and they didn't have a wagon. So they went ahead and they talked to some of the people there, begged for a wagon or some help. But somebody loaned them a shovel, and one man loaned them a wagon. And so I went to the cemetery, and that's where my mother buried her mother. I know there are a lot of stories like this, but this is our story. And there's 6 million people who died in the Holocaust whose story you're never going to hear. At the end of the war, the International Red Cross set up something called displaced persons camps, where people could connect with each other. They kept lists of who was where, who was relatives were, friends were, and the different displaced person camps exchanged these lists with each other. One of the places my mother and her father went to was in Germany, in a place called Bergen-Belsen, Germany. Bergen-Belsen had been a concentration camp, and this became now a displaced persons camp. And they were housed in the area where the Nazi officers used to live. And that's where she met my dad, in Bergen-Belsen. And they were there for several years and moved from there to Hanover, Germany, where I was born. And then in 1950 came to America, where they raised a family and tried to lead a normal life. But everything is colored by what happened. I remember as a child, a young child, I was maybe 6 or 7, watching TV with my mother. And there was a picture, a movie of a train load of food, surplus food, butter, cheese, and that was being dumped into the ocean. And my mother couldn't understand. She was horrified by this. How could there be people who are hungry in the world and they're throwing away butter and cheese? It had to do with food surpluses and subsidies, but I don't want to get into that. My mother was a person who loved her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. She used to light up when she saw her great-grandchildren, mostly Gavin, because that's who lives closest to us. But she would light up. Even in her darkest moments, she would light up when she saw her grandchildren. I guess the question is, how did she become the person she was, so kind and so loving given those experiences. I mean, you live in these environments that are depraved. They're dystopian. We call them dystopian. They're the opposite of utopia. They're horrible places. And the idea would be that when you live in those conditions, you expect people to behave like animals. But not everybody did. Some people became wonderful people. I tried to figure this out. How can people in this environment live like that? And I come to find out that there was a famous psychiatrist and neurologist named Viktor Frankl, Frankl. He had these same questions. He had answers, some answers. And he asked the question. He himself was an Austrian Jew. He was interned in Theresienstadt in 1942, later transferred to Auschwitz with his family, and part of his family, again, were transferred to, ironically, Bergen-Belsen, where his wife died, his father and mother died, and his sister died in Auschwitz. And he would sit in those concentration camps and look around and observe people and say, how can people display this kind of kindness in here? Sharing their food, providing health care, condolences. How can they do that under these conditions? This is a living hell. And you expect people to act like animals. But they didn't. And you try to figure out what is it that causes these people to do these things, to behave as human beings, as ethical people in this environment. And the answer is, for Frankl, was, you shouldn't ask the question about what's the meaning of life. It's an irrelevant question for Frankl. The question was, what meaning should I give to my life? What will give meaning to my life? And what meaning should I give to my life? A choice you make. A choice of how you want to live and who you want to be. Forgive me, I didn't mean to falter. And so this idea was that even through suffering, you can learn something. There's something to be learned. Some meaning you can give to your life. It's hard to understand that at first. But my mother's suffering taught her that what's important is not to be like the Nazis, but to be like the Ukrainian woman who helped her, to be kind, to be compassionate, to care for people. And what choices my mother make to live her life, and that she passed on to us because her father had passed on to her, was to be a person of virtue, to be a virtuous person. Honesty, compassion, benevolence. This is what it takes to be a person. Not acquisition, not self-interest, but interest for others. And respect for the dignity of life. The dignity of life. You should never deprive anybody of their life or the dignity of their life. And for my mother, this meant these social issues we have all the time, issues of abortion. For her, it was in the gray area. It was very clear. You don't. What's this killing babies? She never understood that. It's black and white. Civil rights, that was a huge issue for her. And she couldn't stand the idea of bigotry and racism, having been the victim of that. Those two things alone are what Sara Drew was to me. And what I learned from my mom and who I try to be. Thank you, my dear mother. I love you. Always miss you. Thank you for coming and listening.
The rabbis say, Devarim sheyotzim melev, nechnasim belev, that words that come from the heart penetrate and enter our hearts. And you truly brought Mom, Bubby, into our hearts. She was the quintessential Bubby. If you looked up Jewish grandmother on Wikipedia or the dictionary, it would have a picture and description of Sarah. She always gave big hugs, would pinch your cheeks, talk Yiddish to you, feed you, keep feeding you, and keep feeding you more. She lived for family. Family was the one and only priority in her life. She was honest to a fault. She would let you know where she stood. She did not have a filter. She had a great sense of humor. She loved to laugh. As Joe said, she was born in Polotsk, Poland. And after the war, she was at the Bergen-Belsen DP camp where she met Max, or Muddle, as she called him. She said that Zadie was the most handsome man in the entire camp, that everyone wanted him, but he had eyes for Sarah. But Sarah's father made it clear to Max, no hanky-panky. If he wanted Sarah, they'd have to get married. And so they did. She was wearing the one and only wedding dress that was in the DP camp. They were married on the 8th day of Hanukkah, 1946, and their one wedding picture was always on Mom's nightstand, right next to her bed. Sarah's father made it to Israel. He was religious and moved to Bnei Brak, but quickly sent a note back to them not to follow. He said there was no food in Israel at the time, and there was a lot of trouble with their Arab neighbors. And so they were sponsored by an aunt who had immigrated to the States in the 1920s, and there they came to America and settled in Detroit. America was a good place to raise a family, and it was safe, Sarah always said. Sarah and Muttel were a great pair. They say opposites attract. She was outgoing, he was quiet. He was the disciplinarian, she was the nurturer. Together for more than 60 years, and the family saved up and gave them a wonderful 50th anniversary present, a trip to Hawaii. For Sarah, there was nothing more than taking care of Zadie. He never once put food on his own plate, never once put sweetener in his own tea. She did everything for him. She always said she was watching out for his diabetes. A wonderful mother, a wonderful woman. A woman without much formal schooling, cut short by the Nazis and Russians. She was so smart. She had a lot of seichel, a Yiddish cup. And after Max's retirement, they both went back to school and received their GEDs. Sarah always gave invaluable advice. She knew just the right thing to say. As a mom, she did everything for you. Such a giving woman. She was the balabusta, the homemaker, the ultimate homemaker. She was all about taking care of you and feeding you. All the grandchildren fondly recall the smell of her kitchen. And when visiting or sleeping over, they would hear Bubby's slippers sliding across the floor at 4 a.m. as she was putting away the dishes from the night before and beginning to cook for the next day. But by 8:30 p.m., she'd have the news on TV and be sleeping in the chair. Bubby made the best matzo ball soup, gefilte fish from scratch. She never worked from a recipe, but she did give that fish recipe to you, Barbara. But there were no measurements. She told you have to taste it just to know it was right. When you visit Bubby and Zadie, you would come for Yontif to be together for the holidays. She would spend days cooking in preparation to get ready for you. She'd always put out an elaborate spread. Dairy meals were blintzes, farmer salad that Emily now makes, sliced tomatoes, cream cheese, all the works. She was famous for her latkes, brisket, kreplach, compote, chicken livers. She was the best old-style cook. Always dressed to the nines, she had her hair done, her nails done, fantastic wardrobe. Even at 5 a.m. when she was potchking in the kitchen, her hair looked like she just stepped out of the salon. But she always spilled when she ate. Except for that one time Floyd said that you took her out to a really nice restaurant, and she took out an elaborate bib and put it on, so she wouldn't get dirty. She liked to sing and liked to hum, and for some reason Dayenu was one of her favorite songs. Sarah and Max were active supporters of the Israel Cancer Society, Magen David Adom, every year helping to raise money for new ambulances to be sent to Israel. They always had J&F pushkis around the house. They gave a very large donation to Temple Torah in Boynton Beach, Florida, for the early childhood education wing. In Detroit, Sarah and Max were members of Sharei Pleta, the newcomers. Among these Holocaust survivors, that was their social life and their closest friends in Detroit. They helped to build the Detroit Holocaust Museum and visited the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. They moved down to Florida to Boynton Beach for several years. And then, when Dad got sick, they moved back to Cleveland to be close to Joe and family, first living at Cherry Park, and then Stone Gardens, and then to the memory care facility. As her health declined, she was content and extremely well cared for, as Floyd said, and Joe. With respect and love from the whole family, you watched over her. You gave her the dignity, allowed her still to be the matriarch of the family, to be Mom, and to be Bubby. You were always there. She knew that you loved her so much, and you should all know how much she loved you. We can say that Sarah is now at peace. She's suffering no more. May her name always be for a blessing. Tehei Zichrono Baruch. And we say, Amen. We'll rise now as Cantor Schiffman recites the memorial prayer.
אל מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, נשמת שרה בר אברהם, שלחה לעולמה, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בצדק כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצורכם ונשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם. ותנוח ושלום על מי שקווה, ונאמר אמן.
Exalting, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure. To the soul of Sara Bat Avram, Sara Drew has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May she merit the reward of living a righteous life. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And we say, Amen. Please be seated. Interment will follow at Mount Olive Cemetery. The family will then observe the week of Shiva at the home of Joseph Drew and Barbara, 74100 Myrna Boulevard in Kent, Ohio.